Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Deborah Anderson. Joining us this afternoon is Amanda Walker Rodriguez. She is a former prosecutor for Baltimore County. She is currently the Chief Program Officer for Turnaround. It is a nonprofit organization that works with victims, survivors of human trafficking. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Your background is fascinating. You were a prosecutor.
Yes.
Prosecuting between, 30, 35 cases a year?
Of trafficking, yes. At the time that I left, so I was a prosecutor for just about 7 years, and I handled every type of case. I was a prosecutor. We moved through district court. We handle tons of cases every day, but I specialized in trafficking. It kind of became a passion of mine while I was there. And so at the end of my tenure there, I was prosecuting between 30 and 35 cases a year of trafficking.
Wow. Is human trafficking more prevalent than it has been before, or are we just becoming more aware of it?
I think it's really based in awareness. So I've been working on this issue for about 11 years, and I can say that it's morphed. So what we've seen when I first started working on trafficking cases, it was really foreign national-based cases. It was people that were brought here from foreign countries and were exploited once they came to the United States. And now what we're seeing is really a dynamic shift into domestic trafficking, and specifically child trafficking. And so I don't think it's that we are seeing more cases. They don't, all of a sudden it's not as though there's a ton of more traffickers who realize, oh, this is something we can do. It's really that the public is becoming aware of this issue, and our law enforcement are being given the tools based in awareness of something beyond just prostitution. And so that's why the cases seem to be growing exponentially, and they really are. I mean, I started with 5, and at the end it was 35. So it's been a very dynamic change.
Why are we becoming more sensitive to it? Do you think is it because organizations like yours, Turnaround, are helping us understand it better, or is it social media? Is it media? Why are we?
I think it's a lot of different things. I think it's really multifaceted. So the reality is these laws weren't even in effect until the early 2000s. In some states, they just gained trafficking laws that made it a crime. And so before, what we were seeing is kind of classic prostitution. That's really what we were, the only thing that we knew. And now we're really starting to understand the dynamics. It's really where domestic violence was 30 years ago. So we're seeing this shift, and it's really a long-term stigma-based shift in society. And the media is bringing it out. There's more stories about it. There are movies about it that have come out recently. And so I think, hopefully, with the awareness, we're really going to see kind of the shame and the shadows, end. And these victims are going to be able to come into the light.
What do you hope that people are understanding about it better now than they did 10 years ago?
That it is victimization. That a survivor that you see, that you are maybe making a judgment about, that there's a story there. A person is more than just this one instance, this one decision in their life. And there are so many things that happen to get a victim to this point. I think as society we have to accept that although we may not have made the same decision, that decisions were perhaps made, that there was something traumatic that happened in someone's life. And what you may be seeing is the end of that. And we have to love and embrace that individual and empower them to make and to move down a different path. And until society kind of removes that shame and stigma from these events and these people's lives, we're not going to be able to move forward. We're not going to be able to ensure that this doesn't happen to someone else, because traffickers use that shame and stigma as a method of recruitment, grooming, and control.
What types of incidents happen in a person's life that moves them from here into the life? Is it something tragic? How does this happen? And I'm sure every story is different.
Every story is different. But what we're seeing as trends are things that I think are more tragic than we even understood 5 years ago. So most victims suffer from something called complex trauma. And what that means is there wasn't just one incident that happened to me. There were a multitude of incidents that happened to me. National statistics say that 93% of victims suffered a childhood sexual abuse incident, and that led them into trafficking. Most of the victims that I see in my agency, I would say even higher than 93%, closer to 99 to 100%, are victims of prior sexual abuse. They are impoverished. They came from impoverished communities. They suffered homelessness in their past. Perhaps they were foster care children. And all of these kind of complex things that happened led them to a position that their vulnerabilities were able to be exploited by someone else. And until we understand that that's the turning point, we have to fix all of these other societal ills. We have to fix all these other things to make sure there is not a supply chain into trafficking. That's the only way to stop it.
So, child abuse. Parents need to be diligent.
Absolutely.
In what ways?
So I think from where I sat as a prosecutor, when I would sit across from a child and try to prepare them for what was going to come in the court system, and they would tell me bits and pieces of their story, the reality is anybody can be an abuser. And you have to understand the dynamics of abuse. One of the most important things is grooming. So when a child is being groomed to be a child abuse victim, it's little things. It's sitting on someone's lap. It's combing their hair. They're trying to kind of wipe away at that natural kind of, this doesn't feel right.
You said something that struck me, that 93% of the researchers, at 93% of the people that are involved in human trafficking were victims of sexual abuse from a young age. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the reality is that something happened in these young people's lives that caused the complex trauma, caused the vulnerabilities that make them susceptible to trafficking. And the reality is child sexual abuse, where it may not be preventable, there are things that you can do to keep your children safe. Things like talking to your child, understanding who their friends are, understanding who you're letting them be with. The majority, and I mean vast majority, like in the 80 to 90 percentile, of individuals who prey on our children are people that we know, are people that they know because they trust that individual. It's all part of the grooming process. And so you have to understand and assume your child's telling the truth. A lot of the times what victims will say when they're trafficked is that the only person that ever really believed them or trusted them was their trafficker. And you can't have that happen with your own child. Right. You have to believe what they're telling you, and you have to be vigilant. You have to make sure that you're communicating with them and that they feel comfortable communicating with you.
Ask the hard questions?
Absolutely. There's, I think sometimes we want to shelter our kids by thinking if we don't talk about it, they won't know about it. The reality is they know about it.
Right.
They know about it at a very young age.
Because somebody else is teaching them.
Of course. And they're probably in a classroom. Let's talk about statistics. 1 in 3 individuals is a victim of domestic violence, some type of gender-based violence, sexual abuse. This is happening in your kid's classroom. Somebody is being affected by this, and your child may have questions. You want to make sure they're asking you the question. You want to make sure that you're giving them the answer. You want to make sure that you are understanding what they're going through. You don't want them to learn it somewhere else from somebody that could be a predator.
And when you find out the information, you talk to your child, then if they're talking about some things that things going on that should not be going on, then it is the duty of the parent, the teacher, whomever, to report.
Absolutely. Most people fall under that mandated reporting category for Child Protective Services. If nothing else, you should make sure that your child has access to someone they can talk to, somebody that they're comfortable with, like a therapist, child advocacy center, somewhere that you can go that can get deeper into the story. And I think making sure that your child doesn't feel shamed or ashamed by what happened or by what they're experiencing or by what someone else is telling them, making sure that you are the person that can be their rock and that you together can go to Christ and pray and make sure that influence is continuing to be in their life.
The work that you do with Turnaround is important work. You're helping victims, survivors, transition from the life to a better life.
Yeah.
What are some of the things, and how do you do that? How do you help them?
So we come into contact with victims multiple ways. Usually it is in crisis. Usually it's middle of the night and something has happened, police are involved, or someone has called us to say, I have a friend and she needs help right now. And I have wonderful, wonderful case managers who go into action immediately. And those 48 hours, 72 hours at the very beginning are probably the most crucial. You have somebody that probably needs mental health treatment. You have someone that probably needs medical attention. You need to deal with shelter. And so you have someone that's kind of shell-shocked coming out of the life. This is all that they've known, probably for a very long time. And you're taking them to a different place, into a society that they don't even recognize anymore. And so for us, it's all about building community. In Baltimore, where I work, the community, the victims tend to be both recruited from Baltimore and trafficked in Baltimore. So their community is where they were trafficked. And so we have to rebuild. We have to give them the tools so that they can gain what we call self-sufficiency, something so that they can be completely self-sufficient and empowered to make decisions on their own, and also create that community with them. And usually that means that we end up with survivors who are connected to us for a very, very long time, which is amazing. There is nothing greater than having a survivor come back 5 years later just to say hi and let us know how they're doing. And the benefit of these programs is that you see the transformation. Like some of these survivors who I actually worked with as a prosecutor, because this was my victim service agency, worked with as a prosecutor as a teenager. I'm now watching them have children and bring their children in and getting to play with their kids and listening about how their new job is going. It's amazing. It's the reason that I do this work.
What principles guide your work?
So at Turnaround, there's a motto, and I have instilled it in everything that I do, and it's just show up. I think oftentimes as an individual, you feel kind of powerless against these evil kind of movements in the world. The reality is, if you're not going to be that voice, who else is going to do it? Who else is going to step in? And sometimes it's little things, sometimes it's just engaging on maybe throwing an awareness event or raising money for an organization. But you just need to show up. God has asked us to do that. That's exactly what Christ did. Just show up and be there for that individual. You don't have to say the right thing. You don't even have to sit across from a survivor if you don't want to. But you have to make sure that you are standing up for people that can't stand up for themselves. I think that's really what I have lived by, and I think in my agency, that's what I try to instill in my staff.
How can people not named Amanda stand up? What are things that people can do to stand up, to show up?
There is such a vast variety. So at my agency, I know most victim service agencies, they need volunteers desperately. For example, painting my office. Nobody ever thinks, I'm a painter, I'm a contractor. What can I do? There are so many things that can be done on that level. Donating money is fantastic directly to these victim service agencies that are doing this work. Those dollars need to get to these victims to make sure that they have shelter, that they have access to health care, that they have access to legal services and food. Also, on a larger level, if you have ties with the community, with politicians, think about contacting your local task force and connecting with them on legislation. There are so many ways to get involved that it just requires asking the question, what can I do? I'm here. I've shown up. Tell me what to do. And there are lots of individuals who will gladly just have someone walk beside them through this fight.
Are there specific things that your organization is doing? I know you're fighting on every level, but that can actually reduce the incidence of sex trafficking.
So we have
Human trafficking.
very recently gotten involved in prevention. So our agency is connected with foster care homes that we know are a hotbed for trafficking. We're connected on every level to make sure that we're dealing with prior sexual abuse history. We have trainers that actually go into elementary schools and do prevention for sexual abuse. So you have to go all the way back to, we work with individuals that are as young as 2. So anybody that is touched by this should have access to services, and the access to services deals with the supply chain. The other side of this is, of course, demand. So I think that you have to remember that it is a multifaceted crime, and there's lots of society that kind of delves in.
And benefits, I would imagine.
Of course. So I think that what you have to really consider is, with an agency like ours, how deep can you get that web to make sure that you're hitting every facet that could lead to this instance in someone's life?
What kind of industry, if you could put a dollar amount, and I know there are different numbers out there, but what's the dollar amount on human trafficking?
So the highest that I've seen is trafficking worldwide grosses about $150 billion a year. Billion. So when I started in trafficking work, it was drugs, guns, and then trafficking as an industry. Now we have surpassed guns. And we're actually slated within the next 5 years to surpass drugs as the highest grossing criminal enterprise. People are making billions of dollars, basically in what we consider modern day slavery. They are making money off of people who are vulnerable to this crime, but also on human beings, on just the backs of human beings. It's horrific. It's absolutely horrific.
So when people think of a kindergarten classroom, 1 in 5 of those children is going to end up in human trafficking.
That's
Statistically.
Yes, so
speaking.
the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children put out statistics, and every year it's actually gone, I guess the number has gone up. So those that are called into the National Center as missing, which varies between, I would say, about 800,000 and a million a year. I can speak to Maryland. We have between 10 and 12,000 a year that go missing and are called into the center. 1 in 5 of those kids, it used to be 1 in 7, then 1 in 6, now it's 1 in 5 of those kids is trafficked. And I think for me that statistic is numbing, because so many, what it really shows me is that we are failing our kids. Like, that's where our focus needs to be. We are failing our children. These are our kids. These are the kids that our kids go to school with. These are our children. We have got to take ownership of them and make sure that we are addressing this issue. It is so vitally important.
So you don't think, you just said 2 years old, they've got training for,
Yes.
What do you tell a 2-year-old?
It's all about that prior sexual abuse history. So we bring them into trauma therapy. We do one-on-one play therapy with those kids. So if they're exposed to domestic violence or sexual abuse, kids as young as that age can identify that that's what's happening to them and can benefit from therapy. I would say anybody that is suffering from any type of trauma would benefit from therapy.
In terms of a church, what do you see the role of the church in this issue?
I have been hoping that the church would get involved for years, because every time that I've met, I can't say every time, but a lot of times when I've met with survivors, and especially the ones that have gotten out and have moved on to bright and wonderful futures, some of them are running their own agencies now. When I ask them, what was it that pulled you out? More likely than not, their response is Christ. And so as a church, we have to make sure that we are breaking down those barriers and opening the doors to individuals who have suffered from this, that we are not instilling the shame and stigma that society has placed on them, but also that as a church, we are bringing awareness to this issue in a real way. I think that too often we sometimes get caught up in the day-to-day church, right? We go to church and we go home, and it's our lifestyle, it's our community, but there's something that happens outside of our community that we have to be able to talk about. And this issue is a hard one to talk about. There are so many layers of this that are they're hard and they're sad and they're tragic.
How do we best do that?
I think that it's relying on the hope. I really think that, it's what gets me through my day. There's a hope that we can end this. And I really feel like we have been called to do that. I will never say that something is too hard, because I have God. Nothing is too hard for Him.
Right.
And I will keep fighting because I have Him on my side, and I know that. And so I really feel like as a church, that's what we have to stand up and say. This is not too great for God.
Right.
It just isn't.
That's what we would do as an organization. Individually, what would you encourage people to do?
I think to do what you are comfortable doing. Sometimes that means going out and mentoring kids. Sometimes that means donating money. Sometimes it means using your own skills to help, calling state legislators. There's lots and lots of ways to become engaged that don't stretch you so far that you feel uncomfortable. And I think the number one thing that I will say is important is awareness. Make sure you are aware and you are instilling that awareness in other people. With great power comes great responsibility, and that's true. Once you have this information, you can't turn it off. You see it everywhere, and you have to make sure that you are doing good, that you are bringing better into this world through that awareness.
And a hotline number. People can pick up a phone and make a call.
They can. So the national hotline, if you ever see something and you're just like, I think that's trafficking, or I went to this awareness event and this just doesn't feel right, you can always call the hotline number. They will get in touch with law enforcement or a victim service agency depending on what's happening. So that number is 888-3737-888. You just call it, you talk to somebody, they're 24/7, and they are connected, again, with victim service agencies and law enforcement throughout the entire United States. They will make sure that it's responded to.
Great. Amanda, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for all the work that you're doing. Thank you for your dedication, your passion. We're going to be a better world because of what you and others like you do.
Well, I'm so glad that we are bringing awareness to this issue, so thank you so much.
All right.